And speaking to the Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman laid the blame at the feet of criminal gangs who've smuggled thousands of people across the Channel. And so far, around about 42,000 migrants have crossed this year. Now, here's what Braverman had to say when she was asked by Tim Loughton how an African teenager fleeing a war-torn country might get to the UK.
Well, we have an asylum system, and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dewbs scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
Oh, God. My favourite bit was when she sort of looked around side to side for somebody else to answer that very difficult question. I think we all know the answer. Now, actually, did it surprise you that the Home Secretary wasn't able to provide information about safe and legal routes that exist for Syrians? Did it surprise you at all? And Afghans and also Ukrainians?
No, not at all, because she revealed basically that that's intentional. So countries have a duty to accept people who land, as she said, who are able to arrive in the UK and to process them on arrival. And so what they have done is they've made it very, very difficult to do that, to actually get into the UK using safe routes. And so she was basically presented with the fact that you've made this intentionally very difficult. And she said, oh, well, yes, and sort of looked around. But that's the issue, that countries have tried to get around this requirement by making it very, very difficult. And they push people into more and more dangerous forms of passage. I mean, people don't get onto very dangerous boats with their small children, knowing the risk of death because they think it'll be a really fun time.
Although, to be fair, a lot of them are young men. Basically males, and very few families attempt that route. Yeah,
but it happens, and people don't, like, the push factors are so incredibly strong. And if you actually listen to, I know that I'm being a bleeding heart here, but if you actually listen to the stories that people tell, you would probably do the same thing, even in the situations where it is a complete loss of any opportunity where people are coming from. Most people would not accept that situation for themselves. They recognize that. So if we have the ability to have safe passage for people, then we're able to process people more effectively. But the fact of the matter is people will keep coming. And if you make it more and more difficult, as countries have done, you make it so that they come via very dangerous routes. And we have, unfortunately, an entire industry that's grown up around that in terms of people smugglers. And what the government's tried to do is say, oh, it's just those bad people, those evil people. They're just duping migrants and would-be asylum seekers. But the fact of the matter is they've created that situation in the first place.
Well, they would argue that actually the people are safe. They've come from France, and if you're genuine in a refugee fleeing terror and persecution, that you'd be happy with a safe country. Michael?
Well, of course. I mean, you know, France, perfectly safe country. We know many of those crossing now are actually from Albania. And I think what you've seen today from Suella Braverman, it's a really interesting situation, because if you remember, Suella Braverman's entire leadership campaign, when she stood for the Conservative leadership, was on the basis that the UK needed to leave the ECHR in order to stop the boats, to stop illegal migration. She said that when she was the Attorney General. Now, as Home Secretary, you've got Suella Braverman having to take questions from MPs, not able, because it isn't the government's policy, to put in place her plan that she's advocated previously, that the UK must leave the ECHR. For instance, talk of the Rwanda policy. You heard lots of talk about the Rwanda policy. What's happened to that? That was announced back in April, that deal, by Priti Patel. And it hasn't happened. The reason it hasn't happened is because there was an intervention from a foreign judge in a European court who blocked British government policy. That's the situation that we're in. Suella Braverman herself, her personal view, and she's advocated leaving the ECHR, but I think it's frankly absurd that she now, as Home Secretary, isn't able to deliver something she said time and time again publicly is the real solution to stop this madness. And don't forget, you know, it's astounding to think it was 28,000 people last year. It's over 40,000 people so far already this year. This isn't something that's just happened suddenly. The government, you know, strategy of giving the French authorities lots of money and hoping that they'll stop this is a complete wing and a prayer. It isn't going to work, it hasn't worked, and we need something much more radical.
But what if there were safe and legal routes? Because obviously Suella's struggling to answer that question would suggest to me that there actually isn't much option. You're going to have to get to this country somehow. If you can't get on a plane, I suppose a boat, or hitch on the back of a lorry going through the Eurotunnel or something like that. So basically what is available isn't actually really... I mean, this is the only way people can come here if you're a refugee. So perhaps... there need to be safe and viable routes, and then if you come this way, then you can be sent back.
Well, of course, we've seen safe and legal routes. We've seen it with Ukraine. We've seen it with Afghanistan.
But they're selective ones. We've chosen... I mean, look,
but that's because we know that those people are genuinely fleeing for their lives. And the real injustice with this, of course, is that when people who are now from Albania or wherever are crossing on small boats, being smuggled over by gangsters, they are now taking up hotel rooms up and down this country that should actually be going, I saw the story earlier, and well done GBNews for highlighting it, perhaps going to homeless people in this country, veterans in this country, people in genuine need, rather than those who have paid gangsters to cross from France.
Yeah, it's interesting that we suddenly have a whole lot of compassion for homeless people when actually housing policy tends to be the place where people don't really care about it. So when you need to make cuts, but cuts are unpopular, so you kind of move money around. You take it from housing policy because it's politically unpopular. Suddenly, oh, well, I care about homeless people and veterans. Well, we should care about homeless people.
I think lots of people care about homeless people and veterans. And I don't think that's sudden, is it?
No, but generally, in terms of policy, it is an area that is not democratically, it's not something that is very, very popular. But yes, we do need better homelessness policy. Yes, we do need better housing policy. But in addition, we also need to reckon with the fact that we have a growing mass of people in the world who are quote-unquote useless. They're not useless because no human being can ever be useless. They are minds that can think and hands that can work, but we have no use for them in our dwindling economies, which are sluggish and are unable to grow.
Well, I think we probably do have use of them, but I think
exactly there is a use for people, but
coming here in a way.
But what winds up happening is because they're sort of what winds up happening is we sort of push the world's poor onto other countries, and we use sort of poorer countries like Rwanda as a repository for people, as though like we're sort of disposing of toxic waste. We're just sort of pushing the problems around. And also, if you look at the history of the countries that tend to produce a lot of migrants, they tend to be highly exploited or involved in conflicts that involve the countries that they wind up in. So there's a much bigger problem in terms of global migration.
Well, OK, so what about, then, I'll put it to you, Albania. A lot of Albanians are coming here. There's no real problems in Albania at all. There's no war. There's nothing really going on there. They just simply...
Yeah, there's nothing really going on there. That's the problem.
Well, that's not our problem, though, is it? I mean, look, if there's nothing going on in Albania, that's got nothing to do with me. That's got something to do with the Albanian government. Why should the people of this country pay for people who have come from a place where there's nothing wrong with that place? Happy to, you know, I think it's taking advantage of the British generosity. Happy to take care of anybody who is fleeing persecution. But when you're coming from a country and then you're even arguing with the fact that you're not getting, your accommodation isn't good enough, and you've come from somewhere that's perfectly fine.
A few people doing something might be jerks. They might be taking advantage of things. But a lot of people...
It's about a quarter of them, I think.
Exactly. Lots and lots of people doing something tells you that there is a strong push factor there. And if you listen...
if you live in a country... hotels, maybe?
Oh, yeah. I'm just sitting in Albania. I've got a perfectly nice life, great jobs. Everything is great. I can get married. I can start a life. But you know what? I'm going to migrate in dangerous conditions because there's a hotel room on the other side.
Well, there's a four-star hotel room. I don't have to pay any bills. Not going to make
There are very... Look... If you cannot find a life for yourself, you will leave. That's what happens. And there's a very big problem in the world where there are lots and lots of people for whom there is nothing, and they will leave, and they are leaving. We need to reckon with that. We need to reckon with the fact that we need a dynamic economy the world over that is capable of growing and providing people with jobs and creating things. We're sort of pushing back and arguing that we must hold back. We need fewer people and all these sorts of things.
I just got to ask you, where is the limit then? Because that means absolutely anyone. I mean, look, what do you think? Where's the limit here? Anyone.
I might as well throw away my passport and just start
go for
turning up to countries because I fancy going there for a couple of weeks or whatever. I mean, you've got to have legal and safe routes, and you've got to have and you've got to have a system whereby the government can make sure that those in this country are safe because they know who's coming in and they know who's in the country. You cannot have a system whereby people are coming across from France, throwing away their documents, rocking up, getting put in hotels, and seriously tell me that that is just, that is fair, that is a good spend of British taxpayers' money. I think it's absolutely outrageous. And it is going to cost, I'm afraid, the Conservatives the next election, because for all the talk that we've heard, and I go back to the Rwanda policy, there was lots of talk about that and the big splashes on the front pages. There is absolutely no sign whatsoever of a policy that was announced back in April ever of happening because a foreign judge in a European court blocked British government policy. That's what's happened. And Suella Braverman has been honest herself enough to say the solution here starts with leaving the ECHR. The government, it seems, are still intent on doing various deals with the French that involve British taxpayers forking out even more money. It isn't going to work, and it will cost the Tories the next election.
No, I absolutely agree that we need to get, if you're going to have a humane, I think we do need to have a humane policy, because you can't, it's very, very difficult to tell the difference between people when they're coming and you are forcing them into these very, very difficult circumstances and there's no control over it. We need more open, safer passage for people where we can keep track of them, where we can process people properly. But we also need to get the public on side for that and kind of just demanding or just sort of claiming that you're going to do something and then failing over and over and over again. Claiming you're just going to magically stop this from happening somehow when you know that you can't is just going to alienate.
The Australians stopped it.
Well, I think there's something different about Australia. I mean, you have to get, because in this country, often what happens is people maybe will go overboard of the boats, then obviously everyone has to be rescued, and that is absolutely how it should be. In Australia, they've got sharks and things, so when they turned the boats back, people didn't dare.
But the basic fundamental point was they broke the people smuggling the financial incentive by basically letting it be known there is no point paying these criminals large amounts of money because you get sent back. Well, it's not that difficult.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to that, though? Because actually, if people were sent back, OK, I think what is needed is safe and legal routes, though, because by the sounds of it, and from Suella's difficulty in answering the question, or not passing it on to somebody else, there doesn't sound like there's anything for people who don't fall under the categories that we've already...
Absolutely not, and that's intentionally the case. And so they have created this situation, and now they're unable to deal with it. And then they tried to get poorer countries to deal with their inability to deal with it, that is Rwanda. And countries around the world, including Australia, have attempted to do this. Let poorer countries deal with our waste population, with our sort of global people who have no use. We have to be realistic about this situation.
We can't have everybody, but everybody can't come to choose to come to this country just because they're not happy. Well, let's see what the views have been saying. Let's see. Dave says the government doesn't want to stop it. They're already talking about visas for the more cheap labour, of course. I mean, that's a great thing. They're not good for the people of this country who live here. It pulls the wages down. Irene says, surely the immigrants wanting to come to this country, the easiest way to claim asylum to come to the UK is to apply to the British Embassy in France. Well, you'd think they would do that. That's what I thought embassies were for. Rowena said this country is full. We should look after our own people first. Well, perhaps this is highlighting the fact that we are not taking care of the people in this country. And Ian says Suella Braverman, Cruella he calls her, is just one more in a long line of useless Tory Home Secretaries. We'll keep your thoughts coming. Love those. GBViews at gbnews.uk on the way. The NHS says it's picking up the pieces of the gambling epidemic among young men. We'll discuss that after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip
of the iceberg. And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 25 minutes after 6 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Nana Acquia, and joining me through till 7, former Brexit Party MEP Michael Heaver, also sociologist and Swansea University Ashley Frawley. OK, so you've been sending in your views with regard to migration. Zoe says, oh, I'll definitely read this one. Zoe, one of the best presenters on the show, Nana. We love you in our house. Sorry, brilliant to see you. Sorry, that's going to have to do it. Thank you, Zoe. I appreciate that. Clive says, we've heard it all before from Priti Patel. The Tories are the high-tax, open borders World Economic Forum party. Yeah, they're not doing much for our taxes, are they? Mike says, you can't apply for asylum unless you're here, so that means you have to be illegal in the first place. If you say you've been trafficked, you can't be sent back until processed, so everyone is told to say that. Surely, if trafficked, you should be thankful and be sent home. Yeah, I would think so. And David said about asylum is to be sought in the first safe country, not when you've travelled through half of Europe to arrive. And as Breverman's example was, they are not arriving by plane. So that's a lot of your thoughts coming through. Keep them coming. But now, doctors are warning that the National Health Service is picking up the pieces of a gambling epidemic amongst young men in Britain. Now, The Times reports that there's been a 42% rise in demand for NHS gambling clinics, and thousands of gambling addicts are turning up at A&E, often having lost all their money. Now, the doctors say that betting firms are using predatory tactics to keep customers spending. Michael, how big is the problem of gambling among men of your age? You're quite young. How old are you, by the way?
33.
Oh, 33. I remember that time. Back in the day. Sorry, anyway, so talk to me. What was it like?
It's absolutely everywhere. And I can see both sides of this. I mean, when you watch the footy now, it's packed full of ads for betting firms. What I would say, in defence of some of the betting firms, is you do regularly now see adverts saying, please bet safe, please gamble responsibly, and so on. But, the temptation now, I mean, you only have to look at most high streets and to see the sort of proliferation of betting shops that are there now. And also something that makes it very hard from a technological point of view is the app culture, that it's all in your hands. I mean, I bet now any time I want, on any sport, around the world, constantly, on my phone. I nearly always lose. And having that at your fingertips, I think, is what can obviously accelerate people's problems with this. I would also say specifically on this point, though, and maybe education could play a role in terms of educating people around the dangers around getting hooked on this sort of stuff. But what I would also say, because we know that male suicide rates in this country, I think, around 3 times higher than women. I do think we've got a serious problem in this country when it comes to how young men, this sort of stuff they see in the mainstream media, where I do feel like masculinity, men, it's constantly demonised. This phrase we hear, toxic masculinity. There's nothing toxic about being a strong man, about testosterone, about chivalry. These are good traits, rarely celebrated now. And my advice to a lot of young men is basically, in terms of woke dross like the BBC, I think it's absolutely toxic, a lot of the stuff on there, and you're better off exercising, looking after your body, respecting people, and actually being positive and trying to get your head out of some of this madness that we see. I do feel like, you know, I'm sorry to say, I do feel like in our society at the moment, the demonisation of men has just got completely out of hand.
So you think that is partly to blame, but as to why many men will turn to things like gambling? Because they're feeling less of a man, or they're not able to celebrate their masculinity. Sounds like a load of dross. What are you on about? I'm joking. What do you think?
Well, I think what's interesting about this is the way that there's this desperation to turn gambling into a health problem. And this is, you know, the public health lobby has been trying to do this for a while. They've been looking around for evidence, anything that they can find to say, well, this is a health problem. And so they're saying, oh, well, because, you know, earlier on in the summer, there was a report that came out and they're saying, well, look, gambling is a health problem because it causes harm. Well, then everything is a health problem that causes harm. But now they've gone through and they've looked at sort of death records for any kinds of mention of gambling, and they've been sort of drawing on suicide and so on. So what winds up happening is when gambling is a really tricky issue to deal with, and there aren't actually any good ways. Addiction generally is really hard to deal with.
It is.
And there are very few, if any, evidence-based means of curing gambling addiction. It's a mixture of kind of social factors and maybe some individual factors and psychological factors, obviously. But there's this desire to it's such a tricky issue to kind of like push it toward the NHS. Oh, well, you need psychological help. This is something to bring to a doctor. And this isn't the only thing. There's a huge range of social problems that are really difficult to deal with, that they sort of transform into a health problem. And policymakers like this because they don't know how to deal with these issues. And then they push it toward the NHS. And then they kind of throw money at it. And we wonder why the NHS has become this like black hole of money. It's because we've recast so many social problems as medical problems. And when the NHS is spread so thinly, as we have seen, it becomes less and less able to deal with the basic things that we expect it to deal with, like a flu season, because it's now responsible for every problem in society.
Well, listen, no, Michael, I'll come back to you because I'm teasing you when I say it sounds like a dross. I mean, obviously, from your perspective, a lot of young men may turn to gambling as a way to sort of get over the fact that they don't feel man enough or masculine enough. But in your view, do you think that actually gambling is a social problem, or do you think it's actually a mental health issue and actually a medical problem?
I think it's the issue with technology, which is it's there, whether it's fast food or all sorts of stuff. You're able constantly, as and when, to access it. And I think, you know, there's always been people that have had problems with gambling, but it used to be a lot more difficult, I guess, because you used to have to go down to the bookies and make far more of an effort.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was then easier for family members or friends to try and step in and stop that from continuing. When someone's got a phone and they've got the apps all on their phone, what are you going to do? I think it just becomes a lot more difficult. It's that temptation, isn't it? You have the good and the bad with these technological advances. And unfortunately...
What would you say? But so obviously the fact that you don't have to go into a betting shop so people won't actually see you, so you can do it just from the app and nobody knows about your problem, you can keep it more hidden.
Yeah.
But ultimately, though, is it up to the NHS to be picking up the tab for this? Do you see this as... Because you've talked about men feeling certain ways, which is why they might turn to it. That doesn't sound like, then, that it is actually an actual medicalised problem. A lot of people would say addiction is actually a problem that needs to be dealt with medically.
Yeah, I think men typically internalise thoughts and processes and emotions, and I think that's probably always been the way anyway. I certainly think the way I would approach it would be from an education point of view and have much more practical education about finances, about temptations, about positive...
But should the NHS be picking up the tab for this?
Well, picking up the tab in terms of people going to A&E.
That's what they're doing. So basically the NHS is saying that, look, we're struggling to cope with this because we're dealing with what Ashley is saying is a social problem, but what others are saying it's a medical problem. Would you say that?
If young men are turning up to A&E saying that they're feeling suicidal, you can't really have a situation where the NHS is turning around and saying, sorry, we don't care. I mean, but my attitude is, I agree with Ashley in terms of we need earlier intervention through education so that people are more aware of these potential temptations, how it can become seriously harmful. I think once it gets to the point where someone's of that mindset and they're at an A&E, you can't, in a civilised country, expect the health service to turn around and dismiss them.
So yeah, so I hear you, because obviously you can't do that. Then ultimately it still begs the question whether this is then something that needs, as you said, to be dealt with on a societal level, where people are educated about it, rather than it ending up with people coming to A&E and then posing with,
Well, I think there's a danger too of kind of overstating. It's not like tens of thousands of people are rushing to A&E because they're suicidal. Like the overall, it's easy to say like the leading cause of death amongst young men is violence and suicide. And you go, oh wow, violence and suicide must be getting much, much worse. But the reason is because people don't die of infectious disease anymore. So if you got rid of death by all means except all disease and so on, then you would have the leading cause of death would be violence and suicide, not because society is more dangerous or violent. So I think there's a risk of kind of overstating the issue here. The vast majority of people, it's amazing actually, given how much technology and how much effort goes into making these things very, very addictive. How many people actually sort of don't have an issue with it? The vast majority of people are able to gamble and are able to be adult, to make adult decisions about gambling. And I think what happens is when we kind of like throw suicide on the table, all of a sudden it's sort of, this is very, very serious and there needs to be taxes and bans and so on. There's no evidence of a a society-wide policy that's capable of dealing with serious addiction. There's no evidence of there is evidence of sort of individualized interventions like CBT that might be able to help. But what this is what the public health lobby is trying to do here is actually what's been on the agenda for a long time, is to tax and ban things. That's really what they want.
Interesting you say that, because Cliff sent a message in. A lot of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. And Cliff says, OK, let's ban gambling, drinking, smoking, eating meat. Well, they're trying, actually. Working, petrol, diesel, don't forget to add that in. If you have a gambling problem, you do not go to A&E. You go there if you're having a heart attack. That's what Cliff says. He believes it's not really what the NHS should be doing. Kind of on what you were saying. It's kind of like a social problem. LJ says crack dealers get arrested. Gambling establishments don't even get heavily taxed. They are both feeding addictions. And John says about the ads, he says those ads about gambling responsibly is just the bookies reminding gamblers that they are open for business. I suppose if you are a gambler, you might actually look at it that way. And she says, hang on a minute, why is the NHS running gambling clinics? Gambling companies make a lot of money, so why aren't they paying for them? It should be a condition of operating in the UK. And I think you've got something there, Angie. Well, listen, on the way, Bristol University says that it might change the names of several buildings due to their links with slavery. That's on the way next. Do not miss it.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
If you just joined us, this is Dewbs and Co with me, Nana Quare. We're live on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Joining me through till 7, former Brexit Party MEP Michael Heaver, also sociologist at Swansea University, Ashley Frawley. Now, not content with tossing some of their statues into the harbour, the city of Bristol is thinking about other ways of writing slavery out of its history. Now, the university is considering changing the name of 7 buildings named after the family of Henry Overton Wills III, who donated the money to found the institution back in the early 20th century. But the university authorities say that much of his fortune originally came from tobacco plantations worked by slaves. Now, Ashley, is this going to make Bristol a safer, happier place to live?
No, but it will make some people feel very good about themselves, and the whole industry that's associated with these sorts of things, this whole trauma industry, very happy. You know, there's this idea that this is all about making good on the past. You know, it's about reparations and reconciliation. And what it does is it transforms present problems into problems that are all just rooted in the past. And all we have to do is come together and heal. And guess what? I can help you with that. For just $19.99, you can buy my book, or your institution can buy my training package and get all of your naughty employees to get rid of their white supremacist ideas. And it's just this huge racket. That's all that this is. What really irks me is that this is really big in Canada, where I'm from. I'm Ojibwe, I'm Indigenous Canadian, obviously mixed with white. And this is huge. It's just this photo op for Justin Trudeau to sort of say, oh, all the problems that Indigenous people have, they're all in the past, and that was the bad old state. The good state now is very sorry for everything. And really, all the problems that you have, they're because you're traumatized. And what you need is not, I don't know, drinking water, like a lot of reservations don't have drinking water, good jobs, now you don't need that. What you need is therapeutic healing, because you're so damaged. And actually, it's incredibly racist, because they claim that we're all psychologically damaged, and that's the reason why we have problems. And is it any surprise that they're taking away huge numbers of children, Indigenous children, which was supposed to be the thing that the bad old state was doing? So what this does, it makes people feel good about themselves, it provides a photo op, but it constructs Indigenous people, Black people, ethnic minorities as victims of the past, and ever it shall be.
Yeah, I think perhaps it's got something to do with this therapy generation. Everyone needs therapy for something, and when you go back into therapy, you go back into the past and find out that the reason you are the way you are is because of what happened to you in the past. Look, I'm fine. And as with regard to all this slavery nonsense, I mean, we are enslaved anyway. Look, we've got mobile phones, the clothes that we're wearing, everything, probably things mined by slaves, brought to us by slaves. Why aren't these people looking ahead of what they're actually doing now? Why are they so concerned with the past? Michael?
Yeah, I find stuff like this incredibly puerile, juvenile, crass, virtue signalling. I mean, if they are serious, of course, they should presumably donate all the money back that helped found these institutions, if they're really actually serious about it. Oh, no, let's just change the names instead. What a statement. How brave. You know, I just find it very, very, just very pathetic, really. And I think, actually, constantly, it's negativity is what surrounds these debates. Why not celebrate the fact, the leading role this country played in ending the slave trade? The Royal Navy out there fighting the slave trade, playing a crucial role in doing that. It just seems to me that our institutions, I'm sorry to say many of our universities now, seem to be pretty unpatriotic. They seem to exist within a sort of far left sort of thought bubble, a group bubble, where they're not actually in touch with the country at large. And this echo chamber is pretty concerning, considering these are supposed to be the institutions empowering students with critical thinking, which of course is to look at the good, at the bad, at different arguments and make their own judgments. And of course, when you look at any country's history and heritage, there are things to be proud of. There are things, of course, that we regret. But this is history, and it's about learning and moving forward in a positive way.
They're very selective about the bits that they learn. I mean, this Henry Wells guy, he was born 5 years after slavery, before slavery was abolished. So he wasn't even really, he didn't have much to do. It's more to do with his family. It's the family. But actually, you work within a university. Is this woke culture there where you are? Is this nonsense going on? And are these students going, we must remove all links to slavery, whilst holding their mobile phones and tapping into their laptops? Is that what's happening?
Interestingly, no. My students tend to be really open-minded, and I try to teach, all sides. I do teach this sort of thing because they do need to know about it. They need to understand what's happening, sort of culture wars. And I try my best to give many different sides of these debates so that they can make up their own minds, and they are very receptive to it. I find that it's management that is very on board with these things, and they claim students are demanding this. And it was really funny because someone came to me, I probably shouldn't say this, but someone came to me and they said, it's very important that we decolonize curriculum. And I was like, I just want to point out the hilarity of this situation right now. You, like a British lady, are telling me, an Indigenous person from Canada, I need to decolonize. For who? For my own good? Sorry, I can decide for myself what I need to teach.
Well, what does that even mean? I mean, how do you decolonize yourself? I mean, even the street that somebody may be living in may have a name that's linked to slavery. The clothes that you're... I mean, look, now, slavery is happening now. It's happening more now than probably it ever was. And it's not just to do with race this time. It doesn't matter what colour you are. You could be... There's lots of European slaves. There are lots of people in China, we know about the Uyghur Muslims. We're more than happy to carry on buying stuff from there. The world is happy to buy from there, but yet there seems to be this virtuous minority, or I don't know.
Well, funnily enough, one of the the only successful slave revolt in history happened in Haiti, and they were inspired by the ideals of the Enlightenment, by white men. And they forced France to live up to their own ideals. You believe in equality? Well, I am a man, I should also be equal. And I think that what decolonization often means is removing dead white men from the curriculum instead of making and forcing those ideals to become reality for everyone.
And if they could only tell the history correctly as well, because they're talking about removing links to slavery. There was one very interesting piece where this guy thought he had a gotcha moment because he's black and he's talking to a white lady, and she said, well, actually, and I know this for a fact, that a lot of the Africans sold their people to become slaves. So if you really want the reparations, you need to go back and perhaps see if the Africans will give them to you. Because I know in places like Ghana and so on and so forth, they sold their people to become slaves. But you've been sending in your thoughts as well. And JW says, just happened having a building named after a certain person doesn't mean that you endorse them. The court was at fault for not jailing the rioters for the Colston event. I kind of agree with you. I mean, that's just criminal damage, in my view. Michael says, I wish these people would grow up. Students are still happy to go to university, but take the subsidy that history confers. Hypocrisy at best, sad, small-minded little people. Ooh. And Rosie says, what about the modern-day slaves? Young kids mining lithium to go into your batteries for electric cars and phones. Would you know what these people would say? But we are saving the environment. Whose environment? Nora says, is anyone alive today who was involved in slavery? Stop dividing us. Stop the wokery. And Ken says, instead of changing the names of the buildings that may have been built with slave money, if they really believe that it is so bad, they should pull the buildings down. But of course, they will not, as they will not, I've just pulled it up on my computer, as they will not, as this will mean that they would not have a university or other things that would be built with slavery money. Do us a favour and pull the lot down. Well, listen, stay with me, because on the way, he's still making headlines even after leaving office. Yes, you got it right, Boris Johnson. He paints fellow European leaders in a less than flattering light. That is on the way.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Good evening. If you've just tuned in, where have you been? You've missed most of the show, but don't worry, Nigel Farage is on the way. Stay tuned. I'm Nana Acquare. This is Dewbs and Co. joining me throughout the evening until 7 o'clock. Former Brexit Party MEP Michael Heaver, also sociologist at Swansea University, Ashley Frawley. Now, we were talking about links to slavery. You've been sending in your thoughts as well. Read one more for you. Philip says, how far back in history are we supposed to go? Yes, the British were enslaved by the Romans. A lot of our streets were named by Romans. So how far back do we go? Very good question. And also, a lot of the time, a lot of this left-wing stuff, actually, we're talking about it. It seems to be more towards the right wing, in actual fact, because those who speak in that manner tend to believe they hold the moral high ground. But let's move on, because former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has launched a sensational attack on his EU counterparts over how they prepared for the invasion of Ukraine. Now, speaking to CNN, Johnson said that the French government were in denial before the attack. He also claimed the Germans favoured a quick Russian victory, but the former Prime Minister also praised European leaders for eventually stepping up to the mark. So, Ashley, I'm going to start with you. Do you think it's fair to say that Europeans didn't do enough to support Ukraine before the invasion?
I think it caught everyone, at least in Europe, off guard. Even very intelligent people. I remember that the word bluster was like the word of the month in February. I thought, oh, is Russia going to invade Ukraine? No, it's just bluster. It's just bluster. And it was very, very strange that no one really thought that anyone would risk such conflict on the scale that it could come to. And I think definitely it's highly likely that Europe was very lukewarm on the prospect of Ukrainian victory and just hoped for it to be over. And they really underestimated the degree of desperation on both sides for access to European markets, which I think is what this is kind of really about, that Europe is kind of stuck in between here. And they're just, it wasn't, for example, profitable to buy American liquefied natural gas, and suddenly now it is. And so Europe was completely unprepared for this, and they are sort of caught in between and pretending that they have the moral high ground, but they never really did.
Well, despite the fact that Donald Trump did actually warn them and say that, well, he did, didn't he? Donald Trump warned Ursula and said, look, you're ad hoc to Putin. Most, I think 60% of their natural gas was brought in through pipes that were coming through Ukraine, actually, and, of course, Nord Stream, the other one. So I'm surprised that they were caught by surprise, because they were warned.
But this, as you point out, I mean, this streak of denial with many EU leaders has been going on for a very long time now. And I think the reality is, and you're absolutely right to point out, when the then US President Donald Trump pointed this out to the Germans and said this is a very bad move, I think he actually called Germany delinquent, I think was his actual terminology. They basically laughed at him. And I think that what that shows you, actually, is that some EU leaders are sort of stuck in an orthodoxy of thinking that this sort of crisis, this invasion wouldn't happen. And indeed, they refuse to believe the insane position that they put themselves in terms of Russian energy being reliant. Of course, don't forget, that was about to ramp up. Nord Stream 2 was close to ramping up, which would have actually increased, and as I understand it, would have allowed some of the pipelines to bypass Ukraine, which some now believe was the true motivation from the Russian side to get Nord Stream 2 up and firing. So I think when you look at what Donald Trump said, he was absolutely spot on. And I think it's absolutely clear, going back and looking at those clips, as I said, of the German delegation, I believe it was, basically laughing in his face, how ill-advised and totally clueless they have proven to be. And I must say, you know, Angela Merkel's legacy as Chancellor of Germany has been severely, severely dented further by what we've seen transpire recently.
She also made a bit of a mess of the whole migration crisis as well.
Just a bit, yeah.
Of that. But I mean, so far, I mean, we've committed about £2.3 billion, and we've promised to double that, to sort of mirror that in next year as well. So we're carrying on with giving this money to Ukraine. But I'm sort of looking at it and thinking they were hoping that it'd be over quite quickly, because they thought it'd be done and dusted, then they could probably get on with buying their natural gas off Russia. But I'm looking at this and thinking, where to now? Do we carry on pumping money into this like this?
Isn't that just the story of war? Oh, don't worry, it'll be over soon. And it doesn't seem to be. They have a tendency to drag on. I think part of the issue, too, is that Europe has put itself into a very precarious position with not investing sufficiently in realistic forms of energy production, like gas, like nuclear. Germany even decommissioning its nuclear power plants, which is absolutely insane. And I think now we're in a very sort of back-footed position where we have to quickly develop new forms of energy production that aren't going to come online for a long time. And then you have a whole movement trying to stop, you know, oil, and sort of rely on renewables, which is just not realistic.
Yeah.
So this conflict can drag on because the root of it, which is fighting over essentially energy, is a problem that we have not dealt with and we're kind of refusing to seriously deal with still.
And we're bankrupting ourselves now to head towards net zero, which will actually be the sum in all our bank accounts by the time they've got this done. Well, listen, a lot of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on all the subjects we've been discussing. Margaret says, Swella said a lot of words today, but said nothing. Priti Patel 2.0. Julie said, who is funding the RNLI to pick up these migrants daily? Surely it's not from the charitable donations that people make. Dave says this about the government. He says, Dave, the government doesn't want to stop it. We're talking about migration, already talking about visas for more and more cheap labour. And Patricia says, with regard to the NHS, we were talking about gambling. She says that we are not social workers of the world. Italy stopped them last week and would not let them disembark, talking about migration. Well, listen, you've been sending in all your thoughts. Thank you so much to that, and a huge thank you to my panel. Michael Heaver, thank you so much, Michael, and also Ashley Frawley. Now, Nigel Farage will be up with us at 7 o'clock. Let's go straight to him now. Nigel, what's coming up on your show?
Thank you very much. Well, it's housing. You see, the honeymoon is over as 50 Tory MPs rebel against the Prime Minister, rebel against central government housing targets, and yet we have a major housing crisis in this country. What's the right thing to do? Are central government targets the right way forward? That's my big debate tonight. That and many other things, but first, let's get the all-important weather.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another spell of heavy rain to come tomorrow. It won't last all that long, but intense rain and gusty winds could cause a bit of disruption, so we do have Met Office warnings in place. Being created, that wet and windy weather tomorrow from this area of low pressure that's tracking towards us. This one brought a wet start for many through Wednesday. That rain is still lingering in Shetland, where it's also pretty blustery. Elsewhere, we've got a lot of showers this evening for Wales and southwest England, some hail and thunder mixed in. They will slowly fade. We'll keep some showers in western Scotland overnight, but many places will become dry. Enough of a breeze to stop too much of a frost. Temperatures dipping to 4 to 6 degrees in most urban areas. So a fresh but bright start to Thursday. Quite a bit of sunshine around early doors, and much of the east will stay fine through the day. But here comes that weather system. Spell of heavy rain crossing Northern Ireland, gusty winds through the Irish Sea in particular. Met Office warning for winds here, and a wind and rain warning in place for Wales and southern England as this band of rain marches in. It could cause some further disruption. Of course, it has been very wet indeed. Behind it, bright spells and showers. Much of eastern England will be dry until dusk, when that rain will finally march in. And again, still pretty intense, particularly across the southeast. So further disruption here, especially with a lot of spray and surface water during the evening rush hour. does tend to zip away as we get through Thursday evening. Showers again follow on behind with some clearer spells, but the showers are easing as we go into Friday. There will still be some during Friday, particularly for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland.